Hello, Julia. Welcome to Belgrade. It is great to have you here. First, would be great to tell us how did you become a parliamentarian and get to this really important position for all of us?
When we were discussing internet blocking laws in Germany in 2009, I became interested in the Pirate Party. So the Pirate Party had already existed for a few years. It started in Sweden. And when I learned that there was a Pirate Party in Germany that was trying to keep the internet free and open, I became interested in that and joined quite quickly. Because for me, the internet has always been a free room where I could meet people who have the same interest. For example, when I was moving into a new city, I could find like-minded people there, and it's always been very important for me socially. And when after September 11, it started that politics were trying to encroach on the liberties online, such as freedom of expression and privacy. I got very concerned about it and wanted to become active.
And what was your main fear on this issue? What did you fear most from all the bad things that could happen?
It wasn't so much fear, it was more that I saw this great potential of the internet. I think the internet can bring a lot of advantages to people to actually become active in their own lives, to find like-minded people to organize together, and also to do politics with the help of technology. And so I was, well, if anything, my fear was that this could be taken away, or that this progress could be stopped, or that not all people would have access to this technology. And at the moment, we're seeing a lot of developments like that, where having access to technology and in a really open way is more of a privilege. And in some parts of the world, for example, you can only access Facebook through your mobile phone, but if you want to have internet access, you have to pay. And in ways like that, I think we're making people dependent on just a small number of online services when they could have a full internet access and the possibility to really be emancipated through that.
So then, surprisingly or not, you became one of the most important people in a copyright reform debate. How did that happen? And you as a young person to come to that position, to be able to really work on politics within the EU environment?
I think to understand how I got to this position of being central in the copyright debate, you have to understand a bit how the European Parliament works. Unlike a lot of national parliaments, the European Parliament cannot start a new law. They always have to wait for the European Commission to make a proposal. But the European Parliament can become active in drafting resolutions, calling upon the Commission to start a new initiative. And then if the Commission presents a new copyright law, then it's the Parliament's job to change it and to approve it. And with copyright, we've had the problem that for many, many years, people have been talking about copyright reform. I think everybody agrees that the current system doesn't work, and nobody would have designed the copyright law the way it is today. And I think one really good example of this is the so-called geo-blocking. When you see on the internet, this video is not available in your country. I think if people had the internet in mind when they made the copyright system, then they would try to make sure that, especially people who want to pay in order to watch a film, that they have the possibility to do so. And nevertheless, it has been many years that these problems were known, but the Commission hasn't done very much. They haven't really presented a copyright reform. And so when the Parliament started to become active in this field and wanted to put some pressure on the Commission, I think, well, I was just a new member in Parliament, and I think some of the more conservative members who really want to keep the copyright system as it is, they thought that if they put me in charge of this report, that I would fail. And so one of the first things I did when I got elected was that I got this report on copyright reform. I was put in charge of making the first draft and then negotiating with the other political groups to find a common text. And I managed to do this, and I think the result is going in the right direction. But since then, we once again have to wait for the Commission to actually present a new legislation, and that's the status where we're at now. But I think in the meantime, in the months that I've been working on my report, people have gotten to know me, and they know that I'm one of the members who know the most about the topic of copyright. And so even if they disagree with the vision of the Pirate Party for copyright, they still have to acknowledge that we have an important thing to contribute to this debate, because there are a lot of problems caused by the copyright system we have today.
Yeah, you also had a really big consultation process, and you received a big number of comments. What was the result of these consultations?
So the consultation started when I was not even in Parliament yet. The European Commission made a long questionnaire of all the aspects of copyright and how it could be changed. And at the time I was an activist, and together with one of the members of the European Parliament from the Swedish Pirate Party, we put together a website where people could easily respond to this consultation. And we managed to gather over 10,000 responses to the consultation, which is quite remarkable because the questions were very difficult to understand, very technical, and also the Commission only presented the consultation in English.
One short question.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to conduct such a complex consultation process without the internet?
I think if you did it without the internet, you would just get the responses from professional organizations. So for example, the trade unions, the big companies, the member state governments, they could respond to it. But the internet gives us the possibility that anyone who has an opinion on these topics can actually participate in the consultation. And I think, well, this is important for any topic, but particularly for copyright, because the European Commission still thinks of copyright in categories of authors, rights holders, publishers, and then consumers. But I think these categories don't work very well in the internet age, because a lot of people are creators of new works and consumers at the same time. They may be remixing things that they find on the internet. And not even all the authors are actually making their money with copyright. Some of them are making their money through live shows or through crowdfunding, or they get commissions for their work. And I think if you only ask the professional organizations of authors to respond to a consultation, then you would get a very traditional view of how the cultural industry works. And you would miss out on all the voices of other people who maybe have found a different way to make a living from their art. And
then you received these more than 10,000 comments from all interested parties. Who was the most eager to respond, and what are the comments saying? Where are the critical problems with copyright regulation currently in Europe?
The most responses came from individual end users, so people who are not affiliated with any organization. A little bit more than half of all responses came just from individuals. And the groups that found the biggest problems with copyright were not just normal internet users, but also librarians, or the libraries, universities, schools. So a lot of institutions that have to deal with the complexity of copyright on a daily basis. And also for some groups of artists, there are problems. So for example, documentary filmmakers have the problem that sometimes they shoot a lot of footage, and then they find out that some parts of it they can't use because there's a mobile phone ringing in the background and the ringtone is protected, or maybe they're showing a building that is protected by copyright, and all these different problems they have to navigate. So I think the biggest problem that we found from the consultation was the complexity. that every country in the EU has a different copyright law, and if you want to do anything across borders on the internet for a global audience, it gets extremely complicated, and you have to hire lawyers to find out what you can do and what you cannot do. But if you just look at the individual internet users, one of the main things that they complained about was geo-blocking. Simply, they don't understand, okay, I'm making a subscription for a video service, I'm actually paying for this, and then I'm blocked from seeing it. So in a way, the copyright system at the moment is encouraging people to seek illegal sources, because the legal sources are very difficult to use. They don't work in every country, or if you buy an ebook, you can't read it on any ebook reader you want. So in a way, if we make the copyright system so complicated, it's punishing those who actually want to pay for the content.
What do you think, can we expect change to the exclusive copyright and introduction of some fair use principle in Europe, so we can execute our freedom of speech and freedom to create in a right manner without really damaging authors or any other owner of the copyright? So
in Europe, we currently don't have fair use. We have only very specific exceptions to copyright. For example, you may be allowed to make quotations or to make parodies of copyrighted works, or perhaps you can use a few copies from a book in a classroom or things like that. And the fair use conception that you have in other countries, such as Israel or the United States, is that there are some basic principles. And then a judge looks at these principles and looks at a case and decides whether it's really harmful for the rights holder. So for example, if somebody is creating a new work, like a remix, they don't have any commercial motives and they're just doing this as a free artistic expression, then what they're doing is probably fair use and they don't need to ask permission for it. I think it would be useful to introduce something like that in the European Union, because the problem that we face is that changing the law takes many, many years. And we have new technologies, and these new technologies demand changes in the law. So, for example, we increasingly have digital hearing aids, and a friend of mine who used to be, well, he was going deaf when he was in his teens, and he got a medical implant that allows him to hear. And this implant is digital technology, and technically it's making a copy of the sound that is in the air and transforming it into a digital signal. And under copyright law, normally you need permission for any kind of copying. So if he's listening to music, his hearing aid is making a copy. Thankfully, there is an exception in the copyright legislation that allows this, but I think we will face the same problem with all kinds of technology in the future, because digital copying is just a part of the way that digital technology functions. If you open a website, your computer makes a copy. So I think we need to introduce something like fair use in order to be able to react more quickly to new technological developments. Today, if something is not explicitly allowed in the law, then it's forbidden. And with the fair use system, you would have some room for maneuver for the courts to decide, okay, this is something new, but based on principles, we can decide that this is not a copyright infringement.
And just final question, as a citizens, we have to be aware of different things, but yeah, as a citizens, why we should be aware about copyright reform debate and what we should have really think about when we talk about this process?
I think what's really important to know is that copyright reform is not just about being able to watch the latest Game of Thrones series. I mean, that's can be very important to somebody personally, to have access to films and music and so on, but it's also about the progress of science, for example. All the results of scientific research that we do at our public universities is covered by copyright, and usually the copyright is given to private companies that publish these articles in journals and then sell the access back to the universities. And we're actually spending a lot of money from our taxes on paying access to these works that we have actually created ourselves. So especially I think if people in other countries, in developing countries, want to get access to the latest research, it's impossible for them to pay for it. And so that's, I think, the reason why a lot of people are using services such as Sci-Hub, where they can get research articles for free. It's not because they don't want to support the researchers. It's because it's the only way that they can actually get access to the latest research. And the researchers who are actually writing the articles, they don't get any money from the publishing houses. They do everything for free. They get paid by us, by our taxes. And so I think something that is funded by the taxpayer should be a commons and should belong to the public and not be faced with any restrictions.